It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Iran vows revenge after blaming Israel for an attack on its Syrian consulate, which killed 2 senior military commanders. Meanwhile, Palestinians accuse Israeli troops of leaving a scene of utter destruction as they conclude a 2-week operation at Gaza's largest hospital. Also tonight, come and arrest me. J.K. Rowling's defiant message as Scotland's new hate crime laws come into effect. Senior doctors claim more than 250 patients could be dying unnecessarily every week because of long waits in A&E. A special report from the Nepalese village known as Kidney Valley, where poverty has driven someone from almost every household to sell their organs. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. Israel is tonight under increased scrutiny on 2 fronts, with both Iran and Syria blaming the country for an airstrike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, in which 2 senior military commanders were reportedly killed, along with 5 other diplomats. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Palestinians say Israeli troops have left a scene of utter destruction in their wake after withdrawing from the Al-Shifa hospital at the end of a 2-week operation. More on that in a moment, but first tonight to today's attack on the Syrian capital, where Tehran says 7 Iranians died inside their consulate. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, has tonight's first report.
This was not a precision strike. It completely flattened the Iranian consulate building shortly before 5 o'clock in Damascus on Monday evening. Rescuers searched for survivors, but there weren't any. Iran says that 7 people were killed, among them 2 senior commanders from the Revolutionary Guard. General Mohammad Zahedi had been responsible for Iranian forces in Syria and Lebanon. He was, effectively, Tehran's most senior military link to Hezbollah, and that put him on Israel's hit list. His deputy was taken out too.
Definitely the Zionist regime knows better than anyone that such crimes and violating international law will have its response in an appropriate time.
Israel hasn't commented on the airstrike. It rarely does. But they have carried out hundreds of strikes on Damascus and Syria over the years, some just in recent weeks. They are the main suspect for good reason.
It has killed scores of Iranian military commanders, diplomats, fighters, Hezbollah members. I think what's really distinctive about today's attack, it's qualitatively different. It's an attack on the Iranian state. Israel is trying to undermine Iran's deterrence. It tries to show that Iran is a paper tiger. It really pushes Iran to the limits.
Shortly after the attack, and with debris on the floor of the ambassador's office, the Syrian foreign minister spoke to his Iranian counterpart. Iran has threatened a retaliation, and there will be one for sure. But Israel has successfully assassinated a senior Iranian general, someone they regard as an enemy of Israel. And by that calculation, they will consider the escalation worth it. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News.
Well, meanwhile, in Gaza, the Israeli military has concluded its 2-week operation at the territory's largest hospital, with Palestinians accusing troops of causing utter destruction. The IDF says it killed 200 militants in the area of Al-Shifa hospital and detained 900 people, as well as seizing weapons and intelligence documents. Well, the hospital is in northern Gaza, far away from Israel's stated next focus, Rafah, in the south. It's a vast complex made up of several buildings, which Israel has long claimed are in fact a Hamas stronghold rather than a health facility, a claim rejected by Palestinians. Sky's special correspondent Alex Crawford has this report and a warning it contains footage of injured people.
Surgical and precise. That's what this is in Israeli military terms. Gaza's biggest hospital is no longer. The destruction is extensive. No corner's been left untouched. This the result of a 2-week-long assault by the Israeli military, which they are lauding as an exemplar in military operations. As people entered hours after the Israeli soldiers' withdrawal, Sky's Palestinian camera crew was with them. The conditions they found are nothing short of primitive. Everything and everyone is filthy. There's no water, no electricity, no medicines. Nothing, apart from perhaps the will to survive. I can't speak, says one boy. He was hit in Hamad Street, his relative explains. Both his legs are injured. The child had no treatment for 15 days. The bones in his leg have started to bond. They'll need breaking all over again. The patients who survived are in an atrocious condition and speak of constant shooting and bombings and fear upon fear of suffering, which is even worse than this. The doctors kept on moving us, he says. They were forced to by the army. If they didn't obey quickly, he says, everyone would be shot in the hospital. Much of the carnage in and around the hospital is too graphic to use under the licensing rules governing TV broadcasting, but they appear to show emaciated and burned bodies, including of children, and bodies which appear to have been crushed by heavy vehicles. One British Palestinian doctor who worked at Al-Shifa told us he believes a fellow surgeon there was killed by Israeli snipers.
His body and that of his mother were found dead, executed by Israeli snipers in the vicinity of Shifa Hospital. This was a young surgeon with a young wife, kids, 2 kids under the age of 5. And it is such an incredible waste of human life.
The Israeli military has distributed images of what it says is the battle for Al-Shifa, a hospital they continue to insist was a command and control centre for Hamas, without producing evidence. The military's latest images showed what they say are arms and weaponry that they discovered inside the hospital. And past and present prime ministers have applauded it as one of the army's most successful operations, killing scores of fighters and insisting the damage was done by Hamas. The Israeli Prime Minister is under increasing pressure to secure the release of more than 100 Israeli hostages still thought to be captive in Gaza. There have been some of the largest demonstrations across Israel, protesting against his tactics and calling for the removal of the man known as Bibi. But the criticism that the Prime Minister is an obstacle to any deal seemed only to encourage Benjamin Netanyahu to double down.
Our surprising attack was done in a surgical, precise manner. They killed over 200 terrorists, some of them senior commanders, and other additional ones surrendered.
The protests come as the Israeli War Cabinet has authorized the military plans to invade Rafah. Nothing now seems set to stop Israeli soldiers entering the southern Gazan city crammed with 1.5 million displaced and injured Palestinians, even as the health system is being systematically destroyed. Alex Crawford, Sky News.
Well, let's go back now to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who is live in Jerusalem for us. Alistair, the war in Gaza continues, but now there's real concern of escalation given today's events in Damascus.
Yeah, some of the heaviest exchanges of fighting, really, over recent weeks have actually been across the Lebanese-Israeli border. And we've seen over the last 6 months Israel target high-ranking Hamas officials in Beirut and high-ranking Hezbollah commanders in southern Lebanon. But this is the first time they've really gone after a senior person from the puppet masters, Iran, the country that is behind a lot of what Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis down in Yemen are doing. And they haven't just gone after a senior Iranian commander. They've done it on effectively Iranian sovereign land in an Iranian diplomatic compound. And so this is an escalation without any shadow of a doubt. There will be a retaliation. There's already been air raid sirens tonight in the southern Golan around the Lebanese border. But I expect to see an Iranian response in the coming days. Now, how that shapes up, We'll have to wait and see. They might target American troops in Iraq or northeast Syria, as they often do, America being Israel's ally. They might launch some sort of cyber attack. They might try and embolden Hezbollah to attack Israel with longer range missiles than they have done already. But already tonight, Israel has put its embassies around the world on high alert, expecting some retaliation.
And Alistair, there's been criticism from the US over Israeli plans to block Al Jazeera from broadcasting in the country. What more can you tell us?
Well, Israel has always had a very difficult relationship with Al Jazeera. It's a Qatari-owned channel broadcasting both in English and in Arabic. They've got a large presence here in Ramallah in the West Bank, but also a pretty sizable English language presence as well, operating out of Jerusalem. They are, for Palestinians, the absolute dominant channel for news, both in the West Bank, but coming out of Gaza, particularly at the moment. We have seen many of the reports from their correspondents in Gaza and the fact that some of them have lost members of their own families as well. But for Benjamin Netanyahu's point of view, he's described them as a terror channel. He believes they are a mouthpiece of Hamas, as does the Israeli government, and new laws that have been passed through the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, today, does allow the Israeli government to shut down channels that they believe are the enemy of the state. And that is what Netanyahu is now threatening to do, despite the US State Department saying that they have, Al Jazeera have provided valuable coverage of the situation on the ground in Gaza.
Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle with the latest there from Jerusalem. Ali, thank you. Now, Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has defended the country's new hate crime laws after J.K. Rowling spoke out against the legislation once again, this time challenging the police to arrest her over her fears on transgender women. The Harry Potter author says the new laws are wide open to abuse, but Mr. Yousaf says they will help tackle a rising tide of hatred. From Edinburgh, Shingi Mararike reports.
Very good one.
Scotland's new hate crime laws were expected to meet a backlash. And here it was on day one. Protesters gathered outside Holyrood, voicing concern with a bill they say stifles free speech and can be exploited by those looking to silence particular groups. Among those angered are the author J.K. Rowling. In a thread on X, formerly known as Twitter, she lists a number of high-profile controversies involving trans women before questioning their gender, before saying, "Freedom of speech and belief are at the end in Scotland if the accurate description of biological sex is deemed criminal. I'm currently out of the country, but if what I've written here qualifies as an offence under the terms of the new Act, I look forward to being arrested when I return to the birthplace of the Scottish Enlightenment." On a visit to a hospital, the First Minister defended the legislation which he says will help protect marginalised groups.
I'm very proud of the Hate Crime Act. For me, it ensures that we've got a piece of legislation that will be enacted and implemented in a way that is absolutely balanced, and make sure it absolutely protects people in their freedom of expression, but guards people from, as I say, that rising tide of hatred that we've seen far too often in our society.
This protest has been organised by a relatively fringe group, but those concerns go beyond the margins, provoking debate around not just free speech, but also how the police enforce this new law. Which is why Scotland's Police Federation are worried about its impact.
It is a recipe for disaster and it's a real concern. Every time a new law gets passed, the police officers then have to attend more and more calls. Now, we've got 1,000 less officers at the moment, so it is going to have an impact on policing.
After 3 years of debate, the Scottish Government wanted this to be a landmark piece of legislation, but instead, today could signal the start of even deeper division. Shingi Mararike, Sky News, Edinburgh.
More than 250 patients a week could be dying unnecessarily due to long waits in A&E. That's according to fresh analysis of NHS data. Just 70% of patients attending A&E are admitted, transferred or discharged within the target time of 4 hours. And medics say the delay is costing lives. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, reports.
The stories of long waits for treatment in A&E are very personal for some. Graham Smith's grandmother, Vera Murphy, was left on a trolley in a hospital corridor for 33 hours, aged 92. Her family just one among the countless who experienced the crisis in A&E firsthand. Vera died 10 weeks later.
I draw a line between my nan sitting on that corridor for 30-odd hours, crying and wishing she was dead, incredibly ill, fearful. I draw a line between that and her death 10 weeks later. Would she change forever after that experience? Would she have lived longer if she'd have been seen quicker? Maybe. But it certainly would have made the last few months of her life that bit more comfortable, and I think she deserved that.
The cost of long waits in A&E has been laid bare in estimates from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. As many as 268 deaths every week last year. And they say that doesn't include the patients delayed in the back of ambulances before they even get into A&E.
Our hospitals are so full, the efficiency within our hospital suffers, and we end up with people taking long stays in an emergency department. This then translates that they have a longer stay when they're admitted to hospital because it takes them longer to get better. We're in a situation now where getting admitted to hospital will make people worse rather than better.
Sue Richards spent 12 hours in pain on a trolley in A&E waiting to see a doctor. She says she knows she's one of the lucky ones.
I couldn't fault any of the staff. It's just the system. It's the way it's been run down over the last few years that people just aren't getting helped anymore. And it's, you know, whatever you do, don't get ill. That's how it feels.
In a statement, the Department of Health and Social Care said efforts to admit, transfer or discharge A&E patients within 4 hours were improving. We are determined to continue improving experiences for patients and making access to care faster, simpler and fairer, it said. We're making progress in reducing A&E waiting times, including adding an extra 5,000 permanent staffed beds this winter to increase capacity and help patients be seen as quickly as possible. But 1.5 million patients waited 12 hours or more last year, and the Royal College says its estimates of excess deaths are probably conservative. The link between delays and deaths, they say, is clear, and those deaths completely avoidable. Greg Milam, Sky News.
From the COVID pandemic to rising costs and increased wages, the last few years have been tough for the UK's hospitality sector. But for those in Wales, it's about to get even worse. Tax relief on business rates, which was set at 75% last year and remains at that level in England, is being cut to just 40% in Wales for the financial year that began today. Our Wales correspondent Dan Whitehead reports.
So you've got your pre-order, you've got a table of 8. Yeah.
At the Lion Inn in Monmouthshire, they're set for a busy Easter Monday. But running this pub has, overnight, become a lot more expensive. Business rates relief has been slashed in Wales. It's a discount worth thousands of pounds and one that's still available to landlords just over 2 miles away in England.
So my rates from this month have gone up from just about £200 a month to just under £5. So they've more than doubled. It's a pity that it's gone at such a hard time, particularly when competitors of mine, friends of mine, other landlords, less than a stone's throw away, haven't lost it because they're in England.
From today, the discount that hospitality companies get off their business rates has been reduced from 75% to 40%. It's thought this will impact nearly 9,000 businesses across Wales. England will maintain the 75% relief rate. But across the UK, there are also changes to salaries. The national living wage is increasing by more than £1 for the first time, from £10.42 to £11.44 an hour. It's a welcome top-up for workers, but yet more to deliver for business owners.
It's yet another increase for us in hospitality, and whereas we understand the principle behind national minimum wage, I sometimes wonder who makes the calculations and whether they've got any idea of the impact that it has on small businesses.
So many in hospitality have struggled to fully recover since the start of COVID 4 years ago. And with financial aid now mostly gone and costs still rising, many are having to shut up for good. Those representing hospitality here say the financial hit of cutting rate relief is severe.
The drop is something like £6,500 on average per pub, and that's an awful lot of beer to sell in the current climate with margins as they are.
The Welsh Government told Sky News it is very aware of the ongoing cost of living and cost of doing business crisis and says it's doing all it can to provide support. But at a time when getting customers in to spend is tough, many hope those in charge will reflect on a decision that could close businesses for good. Dan White is Sky News in Cardiff.
Rishi Sunak is reportedly facing a revolt from both sides of his party over plans to criminalise homelessness. Under the Prime Minister's flagship crime bill, police would be given the power to fine or move on so-called nuisance rough sleepers. Sky's home editor Jason Farrell has been speaking to homeless people in central London.
Tottenham Court Road, where the retailers deal in high-end home furnishings. But on the pavements outside are canvas homes, furnished with other people's rubbish. The government plans to introduce a bill that could see rough sleepers fined or even jailed if they are deemed to be a nuisance to other people.
There used to be loads of facilities for people, loads of access points.
William, who currently lives on this street, says sleeping rough is hard enough.
Once you're in homelessness, once you're in that circle, it's really hard to change your life. I think the stigma and everything that's attached to it, it's really hard.
And what do you feel about the government saying, people could be prosecuted for begging, for sleeping in certain places, that sort of thing?
I think if they want to do that, because they need to give some sort of alternative.
Under the proposed criminal justice bill, this small collection of tents could be considered a nuisance if there is excessive smell or if they cause litter. But a group of backbench Tory MPs are threatening to vote against it. The charity Crisis says they're right to do so.
What people really need is housing and support if they need support to get off the streets. That's really obvious, and the government in other government departments from the Home Office know that very well.
When the bill was introduced by the then Home Secretary Suella Braverman, she said this.
We must make sure that we don't go down the same route as some cities in the US, like San Francisco or Seattle, where living in a tent has become a lifestyle choice.
For 8 months, this tent has been Michael's home. Originally from Wales, he once worked in the Savoy Hotel. He doesn't want to show his face, but says no one would choose this life.
I think it's very narrow-minded just to think, that we get illegal to be living in a tent now. It's just so...
It's been described by the former Home Secretary as a lifestyle choice. What do you think of that?
No, I don't think it's a lifestyle choice. It's just cruel. It's cruel. People, they're born into money. They don't understand.
The government says nobody should be criminalised for simply having nowhere to live and say they're repealing the outdated Vagrancy Act. They say new rules will address behaviour that can make the public feel unsafe, such as begging at cash points. But, they add, they're also investing over £2 billion in helping get people like Michael off the streets. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
A temporary channel is open at the site of the collapsed Baltimore Bridge. Governor Wes Moore spoke to media today, saying the clearing would help get more vessels to help with recovery efforts. The Port of Baltimore's shipping channel has been blocked since a container ship lost power and collided with a support column on the Francis Scott Key Bridge last Tuesday, causing the bridge to fall into the river and killing 6 road workers. A 6.1 magnitude earthquake has hit Japan tonight, affecting the prefectures of Iwate and Omori. The epicenter was on the northern coast, but no tsunami warning has been issued. For years, poverty has driven an illegal market in kidneys in Nepal, with agents targeting the poor to encourage them to part with their organs. But now the country has another, more mysterious kidney-related health crisis. Tens of thousands of otherwise healthy young men travel to the Gulf states to work every year, only to return needing kidney transplants. Some scientists suggest it's due to heat exposure and severe dehydration. From Nepal, our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch reports.
Nepal is an impoverished nation, and working overseas has long been a lifeline for families. But it's proving to be fatal. Some face this, kidney transplant surgery, and those are the fortunate ones. The results, some scientists suggest, of heat exposure and severe dehydration. The victims, young, once healthy men. Many Nepali men leave the country to escape poverty, but they are facing extreme heat made worse by climate change. And it's taken many of them here, their kidneys crippled. Hundreds of thousands of people every year go to the Gulf states, but face soaring temperatures and hostile labour conditions. Their suffering is a cautionary tale for the rest of the world. Jeet spent 3 years working in Saudi Arabia. Now, at just 29, he spends 12 hours a week on dialysis. What kind of conditions did you work in?
I had to work in extreme heat, up to 50 degrees. We didn't have time to have lunch, go to the toilet, or drink water.
Everyone here needs a donor, but they have to be a relative. Dr. Pukar Shrestha used to only perform transplants on the elderly. How grave is the situation?
It's very grave, because about 1/3 of our transplantees are these labor migrant workers who have come from abroad. This has caused a huge burden to our health resources.
They are forced to work in some of the world's hottest places with little agency and conditions they can't control. It is a deadly mix that could easily get far worse. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Kathmandu, Nepal.
Well, it was a sunny Easter Monday for many on the south coast of England today, but on one beach there was little appetite for a dip in the sea. Those who did brave the water near Bognor Regis told us of a similar fear to that faced by Oxford's rowers who became sick before Saturday's boat race. As Ashna Hurinag explains, the fear was of raw sewage and the bugs it can contain.
There's nothing like this feeling for Janet and her friends, except when this happens. And they try not to think of the amount of sewage that's been pumped into these waters.
It makes us all really, really angry because this is supposed to be a free facility for everybody. You talk out there and you decompress, and it's stopping so many people from doing that. And, you know, even, as I say, we won't always go in.
That's not an option for Sally, as she risks losing an activity she shares with her late father.
My dad swam up until he was 80, and then he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and then he stopped. So the sea's been always in my family.
But she's forced to take precautions, and for good reason, given some of what's coming out of here. Analysis into government data by the Liberal Democrats has found water companies discharged raw sewage into the sea for more than 220,000 hours last year. 3,500 of those hours were in Bognor. It follows members of Oxford's rowing team falling ill with stomach bugs ahead of the boat race. E. coli had been found in the Thames earlier in the week. Simon says the issue is becoming more acute.
This particular stretch of beach is absolutely fantastic. And you can lay down out, enjoy the sun, but you can't go out in the sea without risking your own personal safety.
The water quality here is now so bad they've had to put up a sign to advise people not to swim. The Environment Watchdog is currently investigating sewage releases. If they find that the law has been misinterpreted, it means that companies could have been dumping here on a scale that shouldn't have happened for the past 30 years. Southern Water says slashing the number of releases is their priority and that they're investing £1.5 billion into upgrading their systems. But so many aren't risking getting in for fear of what they'll get once they come out. Ashna Hurinag, Sky News in Bognor Regis.
And that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andreou and the Sunday Telegraph's political editor Camilla Turner. Welcome both. Among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Metro. Their headline, record migrant arrivals already. We'll be right back. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, let's take a look at our top stories. Israel has refused to comment on claims it was responsible for a drone attack on the Iranian consulate in the Syrian capital, Damascus, which reportedly killed at least 7 people, including 2 commanders in the Revolutionary Guard. Israeli troops have also been accused of destroying Gaza's main hospital following a 2-week operation in which it claims to have killed more than 200 militants. And the author J.K. Rowling has challenged the police in Scotland to arrest her after she spoke out against the country's new hate crime laws, which took effect today. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andrew and the Sunday Telegraph's political editor Camilla Turner. So let's take a quick look at what is on some of those front pages. Well, according to the Metro, the number of channel crossings by migrants so far this year is now more than 5,000, a record for the first 3 months of any year. The Eye reports that Tory insiders are warning Rishi Sunak that he may not be saved by an economic upturn ahead of the general election. The Mail leads with the Prime Minister defending J.K. Rowling after she dared police to arrest her under controversial new hate crime laws. The Guardian reveals its analysis indicating that Conservatives have made no progress on half of their levelling up targets for UK regions. A Telegraph analysis shows that up to 1.6 million more pensioners will be paying income tax within 4 years as a result of Tory stealth raids. The Mirror reports that the number of patients waiting more than a month to see a GP has soared by up to 79%. The Express's headline, 10 million junk food addicts costing Britain billions. The Financial Times suggests victories in Turkish local elections there have dealt a heavy blow to President Erdogan. And the Star carries a story on a man's defence of misunderstood seagulls in Britain, hugging them apparently. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. As I mentioned, we're joined tonight by Alex Andreu and Camilla Turner. Thank you both so much for being with us on this Bank Holiday Monday. So let's start with the Eye and the front page there. Economy will not be enough to save Sunak, the Tories are warned, and this comes after a devastating poll that I think came out 2 nights ago or yesterday, basically saying that he might lose his seat and that they may end up with fewer than 100 seats, which of course would be disastrous. Alex, what do you make of this?
So this was a Survation poll commissioned by Best for Britain of over 15,000 people. So it's quite a chunky sample, and the results were really quite eye-catching. Even if Reform withdrew, the Tories would still come in under 200 seats. And they would be wiped out in Scotland and Wales, which is, I think, a huge blow for a unionist party to be present only in England. I mean, spoilers, nothing will be enough to save Sunak. That's the bottom line, I think.
Camilla, what do you think? Could anything save Sunak?
Well, I think this is a really interesting front page full of different talking points, but all essentially pointing in the same direction, which is that the Conservative Party are in real trouble. They're leading on the fact that the economy won't be enough to save us, but it also talks about migrant crossings, sort of small boats in the Channel, up in record numbers. Also, other Tory MPs being on manoeuvres to potentially shore up their own leadership bid. So you've got a party that are busy fighting each other and at the same time not apparently solving any of the major problems that the country faces.
I suppose at that question, the point is, do you think there will be some kind of leadership contest, Alex?
So I do, you don't.
Reasons.
So my reasons are these. I think when we analyse what might happen, people tend to credit the Conservative Party with a sort of combined intelligence, when really it is individual decisions of over 300 people. And I think enough of them will get spooked by polls like this to make a knee-jerk reaction.
Because the polls showed quite a lot of senior Tories actually losing their own seats, so a personal decision. Why don't you agree, Camilla?
I could be wrong. This could be my famous last words. But I just think that the potential leadership candidates, people who see themselves as the next leader of the Conservative Party, no one wants to move too soon and get burnt out. No one wants to lead the party into electoral defeat, which many people in the Conservative Party think is inevitable. And the question is more, how big will the defeat be? Not will we be defeated? If you're a leadership candidate, you would more likely want to swoop in after the general election to say, I'm here to rebuild the party, to lead us in opposition and to correct the mistakes that we made before.
Because as you say, there's loads of challenges facing them now. Let's look at the Daily Telegraph and their front page, their top story, stealth tax raid on 1.6 million pensioners. And what it says here, Tories will pay at the ballot box as more retirees than ever are dragged into the income levy.
Yeah, so this is again about fiscal drag that we've talked about a lot in the context of the budget. And basically, because the thresholds are not shifting, many pensioners will come into the band that pays tax. 1.6 million is the number you get by 2028 if the thresholds are not adjusted upward with inflation. So it's a sort of doppelganger analysis of how many people would be paying tax versus how many will be paying tax. I mean, it will hurt them, but I happen to think the budget was admirable for not sort of playing to the easy base, as it were. And I thought the notion of pensioners paying a little bit more so that the younger generations don't get constantly clobbered is an admirable sentiment.
Camilla?
Well, I think where the story is really important is the fact that for the Conservative Party, they really rely on older people coming out to vote for them. So if you're an older person, you're a pensioner, you've worked all your life, suddenly you're realising that you're going to be hit with this stealth tax, so paying far more in taxes than you previously would have done because of the government freezing the thresholds. You might think, well, why would I want to vote for the Conservatives if all I'm doing under the Conservatives is paying more and more tax? This article also points out that the tax cuts we saw at the spring budget and also the autumn budget were both on national insurance. This is, of course, a tax that pensioners don't pay because they don't work. So it's yet more and more ways that the core constituent of the Conservatives' voters are being hit.
Forgive me, let's just go to the Mirror and look at this story. I mean, it all ties in. It's all basically the main topics of any election. This is the NHS. Headline of the Mirror, doctor won't see you now or anytime this month as the waiting lists soar. Now, this is waiting lists for GP appointments. Today, we had the story of waiting lists, or waiting times, rather, at A&E, potentially costing the lives of 250 patients a week. Camilla, it's bad news all round again for the government.
Yes, and as you say, another huge issue going into the election. People in the UK really care about the NHS. It's something that people feel incredibly passionate about, both as a kind of national institution and also because it's a service that we all use. We all need to see a doctor, potentially go to hospital. It's something that's so important to our society. And again, it just seems like things are getting worse and worse. Waiting times getting longer, harder and harder to see a GP. Again, it's just that sense that is anything really working in this country?
I mean, in here it says that waiting times to see a GP, they've gone up by 79%. So it's quite a shocking rise.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised because what happens is that as councils can do less and less because they have less and less money, it sort of pushes people into the health system. The less social care there is, the less mental health help there is. It pushes people into the GP system, the NHS hospital system. And so really at the root, the base of all of this is local authorities running out of money.
Because it's interesting, there's been a push to make people go to their pharmacies as well, rather than the GP for things that perhaps a pharmacist can solve. OK, well, you know, if we're talking about issues for the election, we couldn't not talk about migration, which leads us to the front page of the Metro. Easter crossings take total past 5,000, record migrant arrivals already. Now, a lot of this is weather dependent, obviously, both the Channel and also migrants coming in from the Mediterranean. Tell us a little bit more about the detail in this story, Camilla.
So this is really just looking at the latest set of figures on small boat crossings, looking just over the Easter weekend alone, and saying that it's shot right up to a record-breaking 5,435. So this is really just showing in a small space of time over the weekend just how many small boat crossings we've had. And of course, this is a huge political issue. We've got Rishi Sunak and his government really putting all their eggs in the Rwanda scheme basket, trying to get that legislation passed by the time of the election, trying to even get flights taking off by the time of the election, whether that will happen or not. And of course, Rishi Sunak has made Stop the Boats one of his 5 pledges. And when he outlined his 5 pledges, he said, hold me to account on this. If I don't fulfil these pledges, then it's up to you to vote me out. So he's really staked a lot of his political capital on getting these small boat crossings down.
Because if you look at the numbers, and of course, it's 5,000 illegal crossings and people risking their lives, that shouldn't happen. But if you look at it in the context of the wider immigration numbers into this country, it's not that big, but it is a political point, isn't it?
Yes, and the issue is that the Treasury won't let the government control legal migration, because legal migration is absolutely necessary for the economy at the moment. We simply don't have the trained people, and we're not training people fast enough to sort of fill the vacancies that are out there. And so we need legal migration, and so illegal migration has become this sort of displacement activity. We can't do anything about this 700,000, so let's obsess about this 40,000.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at the 4 front pages that we looked at today, it is essentially a failure of his 4 of his 5 pledges. The inflation one, which is the one that depends really on the Bank of England, is the only one that he's achieving. And then you look at the rest: debt, growth, NHS, and Stop the Boats. And those 4 front pages do not make comfortable reading for Downing Street.
Camilla?
I think it's absolutely right. This is just one of the 5 pledges that isn't going particularly well. I don't think, if you're Rishi Sunak, you're probably starting to really worry at this stage. We're coming up to the May local elections. For a lot of Tory MPs I speak to, they say that is the real test. People are already, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the party. We've got all these MPs saying they're not going to stand at the next election. We've got all these different issues facing society that don't seem to be getting any better. This is not a good moment in time for the Prime Minister.
The ancient Greeks used to say panic is terrible political counsel. And panic
is probably what's
going on in the Tory party.
I know it may not be good counsel, but I guess it's a natural reaction to some of the stats coming out. Alex, Camilla, thank you so much. Stay with us, because coming up, J.K. Rowling dares Scottish police to arrest her amid suggestions that expressing anti-trans views could be classed as a hate crime. We'll discuss that next.
I wish I was surprised, but unfortunately I am not. Now, A&E does a fantastic job, but it is an accident and emergency service. It's not supposed to be a holding area whilst we try and find a bed somewhere. And what these figures show is that for every 72 patients who are waiting for longer than 8 to 12 hours in A&E, there is 1 excess death. And I think it's important to explain what that actually means, because unfortunately people are expected to die. There will be a certain number of people who will be expected every year to pass away of heart disease or stroke. But these are deaths which potentially could be prevented. And we are talking about over 250 deaths per week, about 14,000 a year. And that is a significant number, and it's likely to be an underestimate, because it doesn't include the people who are waiting in the back of an ambulance for a number of hours before they even enter A&E. There is definitely needs to be much more joined up thinking between social care and medical care. And when you try and separate the two, it's virtually impossible. So there are a number of people who are waiting in hospital for community services to be put in place or stepped up, or are waiting for care home or nursing home beds. But there is also too many people rocking up to A&E when they don't have an accident or an emergency. And this is a bank holiday, you know, and we need to be actually thinking, where else could we go? Yes, there is your GP, and I appreciate I am a GP. It's still difficult to see a GP, but, you know, we could be using 111 and walk-in centres and urgent care centres and your local pharmacy and all of those things, as opposed to always thinking that A&E is the best place to go. It's the best place to go if you have an accident or an emergency. We also need to be looking at our NHS staff recruitment and retention. It's not just about the physical space. You can have physical space, but if you haven't got people to staff them, people are still going to be sitting in corridors waiting for longer. But we have to think about how we use those spaces, because nobody wants to be dying in a corridor in A&E, and no doctor or nurse wants to be looking after a patient in a corridor in A&E, because we want to be doing the best job that we can. And at the moment, we can't. And it's incredibly frustrating as a staff member, and it's incredibly frustrating as a patient too.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Alex Andrew and Camilla Turner. OK, let's look at the front page of the Financial Times. On the front page, the story that actually we've been leading with here on Sky News. Damascus hit. Iran blames Israel strike. So there's been a drone strike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus in Syria. Both Iran and Syria accusing Israel of it. Israel not commenting one way or another. Alex, what do you make of it? And I guess the question always is, and it has been for months now, the danger of an escalation.
Yes. My sense from speaking to some diplomat friends in the region is that the tendency is when this conflict peaks is to de-escalate. Moderation will come in. And we saw that when the American military base was hit in Jordan. That everyone pulled back from the brink very, very quickly after that. And I'm hopeful that this is what will happen again rather than an escalation. But, I mean, the problem is you put enough variables into a powder keg situation, and there's no way of predicting who might make a mistake and what it might lead to. It's the linchpin theory. You know, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand led to World War I, and a small Icelandic bank falling over led to the financial crisis in 2008. You just don't know what the event, the spark might be.
Camilla?
That's absolutely right. And I suppose what we have to remember here and sort of put in context is the fact that what's going on in the Middle East at the moment is a sort of proxy war being fought by Iran against Israel. We've got Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and the Houthis operating out of Yemen, all of which are militia groups backed financially and strategically by Iran. So from Israel's point of view, they probably think it's absolutely fair game to strike Iranian officials based in Syria, and the Iran state news agency are quoted in the FT pieces saying that 3 members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard were killed in this strike. But of course, it's incredibly important to bear in mind the risk of escalation across the region.
And like Alex mentioned, sometimes it can just the situation can slip out of control. Let's take a look at the Daily Mail. Back to some national news. J.K. Rowling Quite a striking headline, and she is basically defying the police to arrest me, defiance of J.K. Rowling, as she dares police over new Scottish hate crime law. And this is kind of all linked to the issues around trans rights and her belief in biological sex, that basically trans women are not women, but they're biological men, and her freedom to say so. What do you make of the story and how it's developed, Camilla?
So these are new laws in Scotland that we've known about for a while, but they're coming into force today on April the 1st. And these are some quite hefty laws. They carry at most potentially a 7-year jail sentence for someone who is found to have committed one of these hate crimes. And J.K. Rowling is making the point that these new hate laws cover all sorts of different groups, including transgender people, but they don't cover the rights of women and girls, something that she's been a huge proponent of. We've got Rishi Sunak weighing in behind her, defending her right to free speech.
Let me just tell the viewers what he actually said. He said, people should not be criminalised for stating simple facts on biology. We believe in free speech in this country, and Conservatives will always protect it. So that's the comment from Rishi Sunak on this particular story in many of the papers.
I'm a little bit disappointed in this, because I'm a fan of J.K. Rowling, and as a gay man and a feminist, this entire debate feels like my family are all fighting each other. And the freedom to say anything doesn't mean that you must say everything all the time. This is a debate that needs to be handled with sensitivity. It needs to be handled with compassion and understanding for both sides' issues. So being on the front of a newspaper going, arrest me, to me adds more heat than light to this. And this is a debate that needs a lot more light and a lot less heat.
But I suppose she would say you can't have the light on this debate if some views can no longer be expressed. And I suppose this is a test of how the laws will operate, sure, which we guess don't know just yet.
I mean, as ever, the proof of the pudding is in the operationalization of the legislation, right? I could report anyone under any legislation, as could you. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean the police are going to take it forward. Like I said, I don't think anyone is looking for a massive fight on this under this legislation in Scotland, but being issued with a challenge, it just doesn't help. It creates a confrontation, and an artificial one.
I'm going to have to leave it there. Alex, Camilla, no, don't be sorry. We'll be back in the next hour. I'm sure we'll discuss it again. For the moment, that's it. You will be back at 11:20. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Iran and Syria both blame Israel for an airstrike in Damascus, which reportedly killed 2 senior Iranian military commanders.